welcome to Museum on the Move, and today you join us in Mackle Churchyard in the north of the Isle of Man. Now this is a fantastic place to visit, it's a really historic location, but today we've come to look at the Manx stone crosses. There are over 200 Manx stone crosses on the Isle of Man, which is the largest collection outside of Scandinavia, and they are over 1,000 years old. Some of them are early Christian, some of them are Celtic, and some of them are Viking. And we're going to have a look at all the different stories associated with some of the crosses here at Mackle today. Now, although the crosses are 1,000 years old and they're scattered all over the Isle of Man originally, they've all been gathered together in the parish churches of the island for protection. Now, 100 years or so ago, people didn't understand why these crosses were so important. They were badly treated, they were left in farmers' fields, and the first curator of the Manx Museum, Mr. P.M.C. Kermode, dedicated his life to researching, protecting and conserving these magnificent ancient monuments. We're really fortunate today to be joined by Chris Weeks, our conservator at Manx Heritage. And Anthea and Chris are going to talk to you about some of the crosses in this shelter and explain a little bit more about them.
Hi Chris, can you explain a little bit about your role in working with this collection of crosses, especially at Mackle?
Okay, well I'm the conservator amongst other things at Manx National Heritage, and Manx National Heritage has guardianship over the great majority of the crosses on the Isle of Man, and a huge number of those here also, and so my remit extends to looking after those and trying to decide how best to preserve them for future generations. One of the things that's fascinating about these is that a lot of them have inscriptions on them, and that's the earliest record, written record on the Isle of Man, which is an extraordinary thing if you think about it. This one we're standing in front of is one of the ones which is named by the person who had it erected. So this is Crux Guriat, and on the right hand side here there are the words Crux Guriat, which tells us that it was erected for Guriat. And it's an amazing piece. It's huge for a start, and it's also sitting in its old socket. This is one of the only ones which is actually in its original socket. This was how they were anchored to the ground. So Anthea, the previous one that we saw, that was a complete object and an early Christian cross, it is. This one here, it's difficult to imagine what it would have looked like originally, but certainly at least half of it is missing, and that accounts for the broken top.
Well, one of my favourite parts of this cross, every time I come to Mackle Cross Shelter, is this tiny little inscription of what looks like a Viking longship. And I don't know many other places that we have got that evidence, that is actually first-hand evidence of something quite so significant in our Manx history.
And it's early graffiti, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. And also this one has a runic inscription which not only says who it was for, was put up in memory of the chap's daughter Cliff, but it also gives the name of the artist Arnie who carved the runes, which is really unusual. But this is also an interesting one because what you can see is how shallow the carving is. And it's for that reason that these crosses are so very vulnerable to the environment in which they sit.
Many years ago we would take rubbings of such crosses. I remember that was a way to take an imprint, because we didn't have scans, we weren't able to access things online and get all that information. So we used to use crayon quite a lot to rub paper. That seems a dreadful thing to do now. What are your thoughts on that, and how did you find cleaning these crosses before they were digitised?
Well, put it in context, PMC Kermode himself did lots of rubbings, and he did rubbings of every single cross that he could find. And actually, they're a wonderful historical document in their own right, those rubbings, because they show the condition of the surface 110, 120 years ago. That's really, really interesting. But we now know that because the surface is so fragile, applying something to the surface and then rubbing it is really not a good idea. So we've moved on to another cross slab, Sigurd slab here in Mackle Churchyard, and this is another truncated one with a bit broken off the top. So you have to imagine it would be much bigger than it is now. And it's a really nice one for the stories that it tells. And also a nice example here of the remains of crayon from people rubbing the stone to get an impression from it in the last few decades. And so what we've been doing is to partially clean these things and also then to record them so that we've got a record of the state that they're in today. And using that, we might be able to tell how quickly they're decaying in future. And we'll also be able to reproduce them digitally. So we've scanned them using laser scanners. Every single cross in the entire corpus, that's 210. And those have all been made available on our pages on Sketchfab. And also through the iMuseum. So people can see those crosses in 3 dimensions without actually coming here, which of course if you live on the Isle of Man it's not such a big deal, but if you live in Brazil it's not so easy. But this one is, as I say, really lovely because of the stories that it tells.
So this Viking cross tells us a story about Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. So I'm sure quite a lot of you will be familiar with a character called Loki from the different comics and films. So if you look here, Chris, you can just see the head of Loki, the trickster. So we have here, you can just see the outline of the head, the eye of Loki, his nose, his little beard. And in this story, he's throwing a stone to hit a character called Otter. But in this particular cross, we can see Sigurd's horse called Grani. And you can just see this part of the horse
and
here.
the tail.
And the tail, yeah. And he's carrying, it looks like a little case of treasure. So in this part of the story, the character's been successful, Sigurd's been successful and has taken away the treasure from the quest. So we'll have that story on our website available, and also some of the other scans that you mentioned. So we'll put those on our iMuseum site for people to access, and then you can learn about the whole story.
Which includes Fantastic Dragon, which of course you can see on the other side of the cross. Fantastic interlaced dragon.
Well, it wouldn't be a story without a wonderful Norse dragon, would it?
No.
Well, that's all from us for this week, and I, for one, have really enjoyed learning about all of the work that Chris has been doing, behind the scenes, a lot of it, to preserve the Manx crosses, and all of the work on the 3D scans as well. That's pretty incredible.
It's a huge project, and easy for you to explore from home as well. But I've really enjoyed exploring Mackle Churchyard in particular, and when we were exploring earlier, we actually found the grave of the first curator of the Manx Museum, Mr. PMC Kermode, who's the guy that rescued all these crosses in the first place. So it's really exciting to find his grave today. So that's us for this week. Next week we're off to Peel Castle and we're going to meet Andy Johnson, one of our archaeologists, and he's going to talk to us about what it was like to find the pagan lady's grave, and we'll explain more about what that means next week. But for now, we've got links to all the crosses we've talked about on our family learning pages, and we're also going to put up a little document about Sigurd the Dragon Slayer, so you can read that story in more detail, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.
Bye.